Good afternoon. I'm John Tulenko from Learning Matters in the PBS NewsHour, joined by my longtime colleague and mentor, John Merrow, to talk about John's new film, Rebirth, the story of the greatest experiment in American public school history. We'll be taking your questions via Livestream. Simply type in your questions into your Livestream chat box, and I will see them and direct them at John. John, thank you so much for coming out and talking.
Absolutely, but it's not my film, it's our film. A whole lot of people, as you know, television is a team sport, so a lot of us worked very hard on this.
Well, I want to start with the subtitle of the film, The Greatest Experiment in American Public School History.
I think it is. I think it's, I mean, Katrina was not a blessing in any way, shape, or form. Awful lot of lives were destroyed, untold damage done, but it did provide that opportunity to, in effect, not really start over because the kids who came back had gone through the trauma, but it did create an opportunity to try again. And they tried again in a new way. They didn't just rebuild an old system. They decided to try charter schools.
But it's not like they pulled charter schools out of a hat.
No.
Charter schools have been around for a number of years prior to Katrina.
Right. Charter schools were actually born in 1988. The idea germinated. The first charter school opened in '92. Katrina, of course, was 2005. So there have been some time. There have been some charters here and there, and not necessarily all that successful, by the way. I mean, charter schools have a track record. I'm fond of saying that the name charter school tells you as much about the school as the word restaurant tells you about the food.
And indeed, early in the film, within 5 minutes, we're told that nationally in 2005, there was sort of mixed, the word on charter schools was very mixed. Studies had suggested. So I'm wondering, why did they know? They must have known that charter schools at that time performed about the same as public schools. Why did they look to that as the solution?
I think they came with a, I don't want to say ideological commitment, but a commitment, a belief that this market approach could work if done well. And one of the things you have to say about New Orleans is they set a very high bar. As you see in the film, most of the people who came in and tried to applied for a charter were turned down. They said, you have to meet this standard. In an awful lot of places, Arizona is a classic example. They just sort of gave out charters like Halloween candy, and with predictable results, a lot of lousy schools. New Orleans, by setting a high bar, and then by holding schools to the promises, charter schools have performed better in New Orleans than in most other places.
Well, before anyone could open a charter school in New Orleans at that time, there was obviously a lot of cleanup to do.
Yeah, and they had money, of course, from FEMA, federal money, to clean up and to rebuild schools, to tear down a lot of schools. Yeah, it didn't work well for the first couple of years.
What were your sort of initial thoughts? Your first reactions to being in New Orleans 6 weeks after Katrina?
I've never seen anything like it. You were there. You were with us.
Later.
Yeah, a little bit later. I mean, I've never seen such devastation, and it persisted. I mean, and some of it was visible. Everything just torn upside down. But there were other places where the levees broke and the power of the water just shifted a house off its foundation by about 3 inches. But that was enough to make it uninhabitable. So the devastation was even worse than your eyes told you, and you couldn't believe what your eyes were telling you. Shocking. Yeah.
The film starts with the storm, but quickly accelerates. We're past the storm and the destruction within a couple minutes, and we're into the rebuilding within 5 minutes of the film's start. And the first thing that struck me when we get to the point of New Orleans getting on its feet, reopening schools, there's a scene in an auditorium where the new superintendent, Paul Vallis, has just arrived in town. And there's shots of the audience, presumably teachers. He's giving a sort of a welcoming speech. And the first thing that struck me there was the difference in age, the people in the audience. You had what looked like young college grads. next to presumably teachers in their 50s, 60s. And it was striking. I really noticed that I'm looking at two distinct populations of people that were working as teachers at that time.
Absolutely true. And of course, that's 2 years in. That's 2 years after the hurricane and the flooding. There was this great influx of teachers from outside the city, many from alternate programs, most of them from Teach for America. And as you said, they're young college graduates, idealistic, not necessarily very well prepared. And we followed 7 Teach for America teachers for a whole year. Now, only 2 were in the film, but the rest are on our website. And their experience was, ran the gamut. A couple were just immensely successful. One failed miserably, and the others is a mixed.
Watching the film, it's hard not to think that part of the message is young, enthusiastic teachers might be the answer.
Certainly Paul Vallis feels that way, felt that way and still feels that way. But said if you have a set curriculum and then all this energy and enthusiasm will work, work 15 hours a day, that's a recipe for success. The best Teach for America teachers stay on. The young woman in the film is still there, 5 years in. I think it's tough on kids when they have 2 years of a teacher and they connect with that teacher, and then he or she is gone. So there's no magic bullet. It's not Teach for America, it's not the KIPP charter schools, it's not charter schools generally. As we say in the film, there's hard work. It's probably the first requisite. Yeah.
Reference to a lawsuit. I imagine it's the lawsuit when massive amounts of teachers were let go in the months after the storm.
Yes, they didn't have any money. They laid everybody off, and the teachers filed suit, and other employees as well. And in fact, the teachers won in the first round. It's being appealed. If the decision holds up, the teachers will be owed a lot of money.
What did you think of that?
They didn't have any money at all. So how would they have paid people when they didn't have any money? I think that one of the issues that has to do with the rehiring process, whether younger teachers Teach for America, whether they were favored, and I think that's a piece of the lawsuit as well. That's not
Your
part
sense?
of the film.
Your
That's
sense
my
of that?
sense, yeah.
Do you think that experienced, and we'll also say majority unionized teachers got a raw deal?
I think that's very possible that they did. Now, they had to take a test to get their job back, and some of them were offended. On the other hand, I saw some of the test questions; they were pretty simple, and there were some teachers who couldn't pass the test. So, these things are pretty murky. They had made up their mind how they were going to do it, and you could argue, I think persuasively, that they didn't have a choice because there was no way they could have kept all those people on payroll.
Well, that's a big theme in the film, is this conflict, whether the answer to troubled urban public schools is a young, just out of college, highly energetic, highly enthusiastic core of essentially do-gooders versus also well-meaning folks who've been teaching for 8, 9, 10 years.
Or 20.
It's enthusiasm versus experience, and I'd kind of like to know where you go there.
It's a false dichotomy.
Okay.
There's a whole different there's a set of conditions that you need to have successful schools. Clearly you need people who want to be there. Whether they are experienced or brand new is probably not the issue. Do they know what they're doing? Do they know their subject matter, and do they understand child psychology? I think you need both of those things to be an effective teacher. They also need a good curriculum. They need time. I think too often people just want to reduce it to, well, if we just do this, everything will be fine. And the lesson of the film is that it takes time, it takes hard work, it takes resources, it takes a willingness to give up power.
You said, these young teachers, do they know their subject? And do they know something about child psychology, was I think what you said?
Yeah, learning.
Learning. These are folks who have just come straight out of college who get some kind of a crash course in how to teach.
8 weeks,
5 weeks.
yeah.
That doesn't sound like it meets your basic criteria. How much can these people know about child psychology? They're children themselves, half of them.
Well, your question suggests how you feel, but I think we followed 7 Teach for America teachers. 2 of them hit it out of the park. They were terrific. Did they study that and how the learning process works in college? Did they just pick it up? I don't know the answer to that. I think the success or failure of Teach for America, in my experience, and in following new teachers, which we did, you may remember, years ago here in New York City.
Wait, 2 out of 7 does
not
not sound like confident odds.
And 1 failure out of 7.
1 failure. Okay.
So, and 1 didn't get a fair chance, had a lousy principal, and 2, a couple were sort of okay.
Right.
Is that a good success rate? I don't know, but when friends of mine whose children are going into Teach for America, or maybe even grandchildren, ask my advice, I always say the first thing they should do is figure out who the savvy veteran teachers are and go to them, introduce themselves, and say, may I come to you for help when I mess up, because I know I'll mess up. I mean, that kind of humility.
I'm looking for to people who might be in school leadership positions who are thinking of Teach for America. The film looks at this question of, do you need to be an experienced teacher? That's part of the gamble that went on there. Hiring smart, capable, but thoroughly inexperienced teachers. What did you see? What's your takeaway on that?
You really want to put me on the spot here, John. I would say watch the film. Go to our website and look at the portraits of those 7. I think the Teach for America, or the alternatively trained teacher who goes in with some humility and asks veterans for help when they need help, that's a step in the direction of success. The best schools allow teachers to watch each other teach. We don't do that anywhere with our teachers. Teachers in other countries, John, spend far less time in front of kids, have much more time to prepare, so teaching is really both an art and a science. We throw people in, whether they're brand new or old, we throw them in front of classrooms. Our colleague Kat McGrath and I were in a school in North Carolina where a teacher has 7 periods a day with a 20-minute break. You can't do that. That's crowd control. That's not real teaching. So the prerequisites for success in New Orleans or anywhere else would have a different model. And it doesn't matter as much whether you've had a lot of years of training. I'd prefer training. That's what you want. I'd prefer training.
Okay.
I think a lot of teachers who had been in New Orleans, if they came back, they had hoped to have their jobs and didn't get them.
We have another follow-up. Someone looking for a little more sort of a high-altitude picture of New Orleans. How many charters in all from 2005? How many today versus 2005?
There were just a handful, and they were selective schools before the storm. They're now close to 80. About 85% of students in New Orleans go to charter schools. Nationally, only about 4% of students go to charter schools. So this is far and away the greatest experiment in charter schools. The District of Columbia has 30 or 40% of kids in charter schools. Their goal, avowed goal, is to have a system of schools, not a school system. What they've learned is that you cannot have just a whole set of independent schools. There has to be some regulation.
It's, on competition though, right? Competition
there's so much talk in the beginning of the film
Yeah.
about how we need it, how
Yeah.
it will help people, how it will help these schools, you know, everyone, all boats will rise,
Mhm.
kind of thing. But there's a dark side to
It
competition
sure
here.
is. There's the very.
It's not acknowledged in the beginning of the film, but the
Yeah.
film gets there.
The film gets there. The dark side, the competition, you're keeping score. And the question is, what are you using to keep score with? You know, you have two kids, both of whom are athletic, and there's an athletic event, there's a finish line. And you know, did your daughter or son run faster or score more goals in the soccer game? In schools, the question of how you keep score is really the critical one. And in New Orleans, the score is essentially test scores. There are a lot of other ways to judge schools. You could judge schools, you know, how many hours of phys ed do you have a week? How many hours of art and music do you have a week? They don't ask those questions. So when you compete on just test scores, there's maybe if you're running a school, John, you may not want some kids who get low test scores. Some of those kids may be special needs kids, and you may push them in some other direction. And that clearly has happened in New Orleans, and that's another lawsuit that's ongoing. There's enough evidence that kids who are behaviorally challenged, just troublemakers, that they may get pushed out. So what they've discovered in New Orleans is that they need some central authority because you can't just say, oh, go run a school.
Yeah. How do we have competition, but what do we put in place to make sure that the entities that are competing don't all try to take shortcuts?
Well, that's that central authority. That it seems to me you would have a uniform code of discipline, and you would have some kind of due process procedure so that you can't just willy-nilly push kids out. You can look at data. If you and I are running charter schools and we see that in the course of the year 40% of my kids leave and only 10% of your kids leave, somebody should come look at what I'm doing. And I think they're learning that. Patrick Dobard, the current superintendent of the Recovery School District, which is mostly New Orleans, he seems to be pretty aware of the need for more oversight. And whether anybody's going to figure out that you need multiple measures, that's a central question, because it seemed to me New Orleans went from being an F- system, and maybe it's a C now. But C is not good enough. And if you only judge by test scores, you may never get above a C. One of the things that surprised me as much as anything, John, is that how similar the charter schools in New Orleans are. The dream of charter schools is that there would be all kinds of them, be a charter school in music, and a charter school for the performing arts, and a charter school for maritime whatever. Those don't exist. They're all pretty much because they're focused on those test scores.
Question from Karen Harper Royal.
Who, by the way, is a prominent activist in New Orleans and is in the film.
Did you consider including anything in the film about the feelings of the community regarding eliminating neighborhood schools to have this charter system of schools?
There's some of that. There's not. There could be a lot more. Karen herself is a eloquent spokesperson, a speaker, advocate for the rights of special needs kids and the community. That simmering, that came to a boil, that resentment about the lack of neighborhood schools, and it's still there. I mean, they have not effectively dealt with that.
But those neighborhood schools were failing, many of them.
Many of them were. They were all shut down. So when they reopened, what they designed it to be would be essentially open enrollment across the system with a fair where you could sign up your kids and you get choices. They're working hard on that, and most recently when they shut down schools, there's an app where you, and some parents simply don't apply. Now, why that is, I don't know. So then they end up being assigned to a school, and quite often that's not a very good school. There's a lot of work to be done. I mean, this is really, as we say in the film, this is a work in progress, very much a work in progress. But let me just speak to Karen, the question about what's included. We filmed down there for 6.5 years, 6.5 years, and then we cut it down to an hour. Now, there's a lot of extra material on the DVD But there's an awful lot we couldn't get in there. It was very tough.
Yeah, there has been some questions have been raised about the relationship between the funders and the content.
Sure.
The Doris and Donald Fisher Fund is a large supporter of charter school initiatives
absolutely,
in
yeah.
California.
So too is Quillian Hastings. Yeah.
So address those folks, please, who question your editorial independence.
None of those people ever said a word, even a hint of an effort to control the content. I promise you, if anyone had, we would have told them to take a hike. Funders, the Gates Foundation gave a little bit of money as well. People who had seen the reporting we did for the NewsHour had a sense that we, I think, were honest brokers. I don't think they wouldn't have supported it if they thought we were anti or just totally one-sided. Funders, these funders have never attempted to influence the content. In my career, which is now almost 40 years, I've only had 2 funders attempt to control the content. In both cases, I returned the money.
There are 89,000 public schools in this country and 49,000 public school students, K through 49 million.
Yeah, about 50 million.
49 million.
4% of public school students go to charter school. 4%.
A total of 1.8 million students.
Charter schools get much more attention than they deserve.
So why give them attention in this film?
Well, in this case, this is the greatest experiment in the history of American public education. And this is testing the depth of the water with both feet. This is just going all in. Yeah.
To what extent can we look at charter schools as the quote-unquote solution?
You can't. You cannot. Charter school, I think I said this earlier, charter school tells you nothing. It says it's something about governance. It's like restaurant. Doesn't tell you anything about the food. You've got to go test it. If their lesson of New Orleans, though, is that they set a high bar for granting charters, and that's under pressure right now. Right now, there's only one entity that can grant a charter there, but that's being loosened up. The governor wants to make it so that many more places can grant charters. If that happens, inevitably there'll be lower standards. And if they don't keep watch, it'll all disappear. It won't disappear. It'll just be watered down and be destined to remain mediocre.
You know, the film talks a lot about the politics of school governance. And I caught myself wondering many times about the substance of what's taught in these schools in particular. There is an incredible emphasis on college for everyone.
In the KIP schools in particular.
Seems to be across the board. But yet many of the older students that you profile, high school, young men and women in high school, from disadvantaged communities, I don't know how to say this kindly, but they don't strike me as being quite ready for college. Like they might do better with more options, the way Germany runs its school, the way where career paths of different kinds are laid out, and not everyone is expected. There's more than one avenue to success.
Yeah. Well, with the younger kids in the elementary schools, the focus is relentlessly on not just high school, but school beyond that, 4 years of college. That's probably not a bad thing. The kids in the high schools, many of them are behind. The 2 kids in profile, one now has her own beauty shop. That's fine. She's not a college kid. She's got a goal, and education ought to enable people to become as much as they can be, whether that is going on to Tulane or going on to run a beauty salon. My quarrel is with the sameness. It's not that they're all saying A, it's that they're all saying the same thing. I would love to see more variety among the charter schools. This is not in the film, but I was told that there was a charter school wannabe. He went through the approval process to get a charter school that would be built around the performing arts, and in the end decided not to open the school because of the relentless focus on test scores. And he just thought, when we're going to have kids doing art and music, and they won't be able to just pass these tests, and therefore will fail. And so we just folded up. Now, that's not in the film. We never followed that storyline, but I know that's true. And there is that, because of that narrow focus, you get a narrow range of options.
Yeah. Well, on the college thing, my sense is that children are perhaps the worst people at deferring gratification. And yet we ask them to defer gratification for 12 years. When we say to them, when they're kindergartners, you know,
Your class of X.
your class of X. It doesn't really work that well.
Well, I don't know. The kids, the KIPP schools, which are the dominant charter school model, some people attack them and say they're, militaristic. I've seen an awful lot of joy in those schools. So,
Just to wrap it up, the question of, I just want to bring up the question of unions, go back to that one more time. So we've created a system of charter schools down there. Most of the people are not part of the union.
that's correct. Yeah.
They're probably paid less. Maybe
Not
no.
necessarily. Not necessarily.
The question is, can a non-unionized system of schools provide working conditions that are attractive to large numbers of teachers?
I think that's a kind of a straw man question as well, John. Louisiana is a right-to-work state. Union was never that big a deal, that powerful. I think unions and charter schools certainly can coexist, and I think in places where teachers are expected to work 12 to 15 hours a day, at some point those teachers are going to maybe going to say, hey, we need a union because we can't have a family life if I'm working 15 hours a day, and therefore I need some kind of organization to protect my rights. But I think this idea that somehow unions stand in the way of good education is just foolish. The most heavily unionized teacher union state in the country is Massachusetts, which by most ratings has the best public schools in the country. So, and then some of the states with no unions whatsoever, or no union power, have terrible public education.
To wrap this up, you called the film Rebirth.
Yeah.
You started filming in 2005. I suppose we're past the birthing stage now. Yeah.
Yeah.
We might be in the
Toddler.
Yeah, toddler stage.
Yeah. Toddler.
What's ahead?
It is a work in progress, and a lot depends on what happens, whether they remain vigilant about setting high standards. If they open the door to letting lots of different places grant charters, I think that's going to that's a downhill trajectory, it seems to me. If they say we have to judge schools by a different set of measures, by a more complex set of measures, do you have phys ed, do you have art, do you have music, how many hours? If you start putting those things into the measure, what's teacher turnover, what's student attendance, then you get a more sophisticated measure. I think you get a different kind of school. They have to improve the controls to make sure charter schools are not pushing kids out, because some are, and they have to clamp down on schools that break the rules like that. It's very much in stake. It's in the toddler stage, but more kids in New Orleans are getting more opportunities at education than before Katrina. I don't think anybody would say, let's go back to the way things were. But they can't stay the way they are either. They have to keep getting better.
Well, the film is called Rebirth.
And it's
The
on
story-
Netflix.
The story of the greatest experiment in American public school history. It is available for watching on Netflix. Kindly take a look, recommend it to your friends, get the discussion going. John, congratulations, it's a terrific
Thanks,
film. It moves
thanks.
along very nicely.
You were a big help making the film, John, so, as were all our colleagues. Thanks, it's been a lot of fun.
All right.